Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're tackling something absolutely massive. We are going to look at one of the most transformative, destructive, and deeply complex events in human history, World War I, or as it was known then, the Great War. I'm incredibly excited to walk you through this material because, frankly, it is the ultimate example of unintended historical consequences. We're going to see exactly how a single isolated spark set an entire continent completely ablaze, reshaping the modern world in ways that, believe it or not, still echo today. Okay, let's dive into this. 16 million. I want you to just sit with that number for a second. Before we even touch on the politics, the kings, or the empires, we have to establish the sheer, staggering human cost of this conflict. Between 1914 and 1918, more than 16 million people lost their lives, and millions more were wounded. This wasn't just a typical war, it was a demographic catastrophe that quite literally altered the social fabric of the globe. So, how exactly did we get to that devastating number? We'll trace this unstoppable chain reaction across 5 distinct phases. The powder keg ignites, drawing the battle lines, the industrial battlefield, turning the tide, and finally, a changed world. Right, let's jump into Section 1, the powder keg ignites. To really understand the explosion, we need to zoom out and look at Europe right before the war. At the dawn of the 20th century, Europe wasn't just a collection of neighboring countries. It was dominated by massive, immensely powerful empires. You had the British Empire, the German Empire, the Russian Empire, Austria-Hungary, and France. And all of these empires were experiencing rapid industrial growth and massive military expansion. Naturally, this led to fierce, aggressive competition for global colonies. When you mix that intense level of imperialism with rising nationalism and strict militarism, well, you don't just have a continent anymore. You have a geopolitical powder keg, building up incredible, unsustainable pressure. But every powder keg needs a spark, right? Zoom in tightly with me here. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was assassinated in Sarajevo by a man named Gavrilo Princip. This single, highly localized, almost microscopic event sent a sudden shockwave across all of Europe. Austria-Hungary immediately blamed Serbia and issued an ultimatum. The pressure had been building for decades, and suddenly it had nowhere to go but out. That brings us to Section 2, drawing the battle lines. The world as they knew it was about to become violently divided. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how fast things escalated. Because of a very complex, pre-existing network of alliances, that regional dispute in Sarajevo acted like a tripwire. By August of 1914, Europe was split right down the middle into 2 massive opposing military blocs. On one side, you had the Allied powers, France, the United Kingdom, Russia, Italy, and eventually the United States. Staring right back at them were the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria. In just a matter of weeks, one assassination dragged the entire globe into an all-out war. Now we enter Section 3, the industrial battlefields. Up until this point, a lot of people still held on to these romantic 19th century ideas of war. Cavalry charges, bright uniforms, quick and glorious victories. But the reality on the Western Front was about to be shockingly different. Deploying those old 19th century tactics against 20th century weapons created an absolute nightmare. Instead of quick movement, armies just dug in, creating extensive trench systems that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. And right in the middle of it all was no man's land. Officially, it's defined as an area between opposing trenches, constantly exposed to machine gun fire and artillery bombardment, but unofficially, it was pure horror. Soldiers in those trenches faced unimaginable conditions. Endless mud, flooding, freezing temperatures, disease, rats, and profound psychological trauma. Any lingering romance of war was utterly buried in that mud. Now, the reason those trenches were so impossibly deadly was the sheer unprecedented scale of industrialized technology. Machine guns and heavy artillery caused massive, sweeping casualties unlike anything seen before. Poison gas introduced an entirely new, terrifying form of indiscriminate destruction. Meanwhile, tanks and submarines brought heavy mechanized combat straight to the front lines and the open oceans, and military aircraft turned the sky itself into a brand new theater for aerial dominance. So, the crucial point is that this combination of static trenches and hyperlethal technology led to a scale of loss that is almost impossible to comprehend today. Just look at the outcomes of these major battles. The Battle of Verdun in 1916 was one of the longest in human history, resulting in enormous, devastating losses for both the defending French forces and the attacking Germans. The Battle of the Somme saw well over 1 million casualties. Actually, let's put that into perspective. The British Army alone suffered nearly 60,000 casualties on the very first day. It's just staggering. Meanwhile, at the Gallipoli Campaign, the Allies tried to capture the Dardanelles Strait but were completely repelled by Ottoman forces. Everywhere you looked, it was a brutal, grinding, seemingly endless stalemate. Moving on to Section 4, Turning the Tide. As the years dragged on, the pure, relentless exhaustion of the conflict really began to take its toll. By late 1918, severe economic hardship and rapidly declining morale were seriously weakening the Central Powers. But a massive geopolitical shift finally broke the stalemate, and it happened in 3 distinct steps. First, Germany launched unrestricted submarine warfare, which basically meant sinking ships indiscriminately. Second, the infamous Zimmermann telegram was intercepted. This revealed a secret German proposal asking Mexico to ally against the U.S. These 2 massive provocations combined to trigger Step 3, the United States formally entering the war in 1917 on the side of the Allies. And the arrival of fresh American troops provided the exact strength and momentum the Allies desperately needed to finally push back against an exhausted German army. Let's move to and see how this builds to the definitive moment of the entire conflict. Facing relentless Allied offensives and total internal collapse, Germany simply could not fight any longer. On November 11, 1918, exactly at 11 a.m., famously the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, an armistice agreement was signed. The fighting stopped. At long last, the guns across Europe fell silent. Which brings us to our final section, a changed world. The war was officially over, but the map of the world and the landscape of international relations would never, ever be the same. Zooming all the way out, the aftermath was just profound. As we established earlier, more than 16 million lives were lost. But look at the geopolitical collapse. 4 massive, centuries-old empires were completely dismantled. The German, Russian, Ottoman, and Austro-Hungarian empires simply ceased to exist. This led to widespread economic destruction across the continent, the drawing of brand new national borders, the sudden creation of new sovereign nations, and critically, a lingering dangerous political instability that hung over Europe. In 1919, the victorious Allies formalized the peace by signing the Treaty of Versailles, and the terms imposed on Germany were notably severe. Germany was formally required to accept full and total responsibility for causing the war. They were ordered to pay heavy economic reparations, drastically reduce the size of their military forces, and surrender significant portions of their territory. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the profound, unintended socio-political fallout. Impartially speaking, the consequences of those terms were disastrous. Many everyday Germans viewed the Treaty of Versailles as deeply unfair and deeply humiliating. The crushing economic strain combined with that national humiliation created a potent, festering resentment. And unfortunately, that widespread public anger became a highly effective tool for political manipulation, which ultimately contributed directly to the rise of extremism in the years that followed. Which leaves us with one incredibly haunting question to think about. World War I reshaped borders, it advanced terrifying new military technology, and it supposedly ended the conflicts of the old empires once and for all. But did the very treaty that ended the Great War inadvertently set the stage for an even more destructive conflict just 2 decades later? It is a powerful reminder that the consequences of war and exactly how peace is waged echo long, long after the fighting stops. Keep that in mind as you continue exploring history. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.